So the third issue that we're going to go through, which is again an instance where political process can have problems, is more of a general tendency of democracy. Okay, and it's what we call, this is our third one here, is what we call the short-sightedness of the political process. Right. So that is, in most democratic countries, the democratic political process, if it's in charge of different spending programs, tends to be short-sighted, okay? And what we mean by that is there's an incentive for politicians to favor bills that have benefits that are realized soon, right? So keep in mind, politicians are generally running for re-election every 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years, right? In the United States, members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election every 2 years, right? The president is up for re-election every 4 years, right? Governors are up for re-election every 4 years as well, right? The U.S. Senate is every 6 years. So these politicians have to come back to the voter, and when the voter says, well, what did you do for me in the last 2 years? These politicians have to be able to say something, right? And so there's very much a tendency for them to want programs that have like short-term benefits right away, so that when they can run for re-election, they have something to brag about, right? So there's a tendency in democratic politics to favor projects or programs that have benefits that are realized soon. So when I run for office, I can point to this and say, I did that, right? Now, that's all fine, right? But the issue is, most politicians aren't terribly excited to go back to those voters and say, yes, look, we did X, Y, and Z, and here's the bill. Here's how much you have to pay, right? That politician's not going to do very well in that next election, right? Therefore, politicians tend not to use taxation as a way to gain additional revenue. They tend to borrow, right? And so that is, they like to push those costs into the future, right? Whose future? Well, your future, right? The older generation won't be around to have to deal with all these debt issues, but us, the younger folks, yeah, great. We get to deal with it, right? But that's the idea. So a politician is going to be more successful when they run for re-election if they can show off stuff that they've done, and the voter is going to like them if they haven't made the voters pay the cost of all those programs, right? The way they can push that into the future is by borrowing, right? And this is why we see debt issues both at the state level here in the United States and at the federal level in the United States. And this same issue is there in European countries as well, right? They have the same spending and debt issues that we do, the same short-sightedness of their political process as well, okay? So, debt financing, anyone? So this graph here just kind of shows you historically. I could have continued this graph all the way back to 1960 and it basically would look the same, right? What this is showing you is that each year this is the deficit of the U.S. federal government, and this is as a share of GDP. So instead of listing it as dollars, it's just as a share of the size of our economy, okay? And as you can see, right, in almost all years, negative, i.e. deficit. We are borrowing every year, right? Every year since 2000, roughly 2000, 2001, right? Every year we have borrowed money, right? In the bottoms of the financial crisis, right? 2008, 2009, right? The federal government borrowed money that was 10% of the size of our total economy in that 1 year, right? This is just the deficit. And this explains why our national debt is growing and growing and growing and is now over $30 trillion. That's the gross debt, but it's over $30 trillion, right? Same thing before, basically 1997 and 1998, again, deficits. Right? There was this fleeting moment where We had a budget surplus. Those were glorious days. And then it left to go hang out with unicorns, right? So again, if I continue this graph back to 1960, you would see basically the same thing. It's just deficits as far as the eye can see, right? So in our modern era, politicians generally don't like to raise taxes on the populace. What they do is they like to borrow money and push those costs out in the future. At some point, that bill's got to be paid, and those days are coming.